The morning sun shone through the trees and a thick blanket of fog hung low over the forest. As the light crept through the branches, the silhouette of a figure appeared, lying on a bed of moss and brambles. The figure, a young woman, stirred and slowly sat up, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. She looked around, taking in her surroundings. She had no memory of how she had gotten here, or even who she was. She felt a sense of confusion and panic begin to rise in her chest. Taking a deep breath, she tried to calm herself. She noticed a small stream nearby and made her way towards it. As she bent down to take a drink, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the water. She stared at it for a moment, trying to remember something, anything, about herself. But there was nothing. No memories, no connections. She was a blank slate. Feeling lost and alone, she started to walk, not knowing where she was going or what she would find. As she walked, the fog began to clear and she saw that she was in a beautiful forest, full of life and color. She felt a spark of wonder and curiosity, and decided to explore. As she walked, she came across different animals and plants, some she recognized and some she didn't. She marveled at their beauty and felt a sense of connection to them. Eventually, she came across a clearing and saw a small cabin in the distance. She made her way towards it, hoping to find some answers or help. She knocked on the door, and to her surprise, it was answered by an old woman. "Hello, dear," the woman said with a warm smile. "Welcome to my home. You look lost. Can I help you?" The young woman felt a wave of relief wash over her. She gratefully accepted the woman's offer and entered the cabin, eager to learn more about herself and her surroundings. The old woman led the young woman inside and offered her a seat at the table. She poured her a cup of tea and sat down across from her. "Now, tell me, dear," the old woman said. "What brings you to my doorstep?" The young woman explained her situation, how she had no memory of who she was or how she had gotten here. The old woman listened intently, nodding along. "I see," the old woman said, her eyes narrowing. "You have stumbled upon a dark and dangerous place, my dear. This forest is full of secrets and hidden dangers. And you, with no memory of your past, are especially vulnerable." The young woman felt a sense of fear and unease settle in her chest. She didn't know what the old woman meant, but she didn't like the sound of it. "What should I do?" the young woman asked, her voice shaking. "You must stay here with me, at least for now," the old woman said. "I will protect you and help you regain your memories. But you must promise to never leave this cabin, no matter what. The forest is not safe for someone like you." The young woman didn't like the idea of being trapped in the cabin, but she also didn't want to venture out into the dangerous forest alone. She reluctantly agreed to the old woman's terms. As the days passed, the young woman grew increasingly restless. She spent her time reading books and tending to the garden, but she yearned for adventure and excitement. She often found herself gazing out the window, watching the forest beyond with a sense of longing. One day, the old woman caught her looking. "You must not leave this cabin, my dear," she warned. "There are things in this forest that will harm you. You are not ready to face them yet." But the young woman couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing out on something. She felt trapped and suffocated in the cabin. She decided to take a chance and venture out into the forest, despite the old woman's warning. As soon as she stepped outside, she felt a sense of freedom and exhilaration. She ran through the forest, reveling in the fresh air and sunshine. But as she ran, she realized that the old woman had been right. The forest was full of hidden dangers. She could hear the sound of snapping twigs and rustling leaves, as if something was following her. She ran as fast as she could, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what was chasing her, but she knew she had to get away. She stumbled and fell, her leg catching on a branch. She looked up and saw a group of wild animals, their eyes glowing with malice. The young woman screamed and scrambled to her feet. She ran towards the cabin, but it was too far. She knew she wouldn't make it. She closed her eyes, bracing for the attack. But it never came. When she opened her eyes, she saw the old woman standing between her and the wild animals, her eyes glowing with a fierce light. The animals backed away, snarling, and then fled into the forest. The young woman was shaken, but unharmed. She thanked the old woman for saving her life. "I told you not to leave the cabin," the old woman said, her voice stern. "But you didn't listen. You must never defy me again, or it could cost you your life. Do you understand?" The young woman nodded, grateful to be alive but also feeling more trapped than ever. The young woman spent the next few weeks in the cabin, following the old woman's orders to the letter. She was terrified of what the old woman would do if she defied her again. But as time passed, she couldn't help but feel more and more trapped. She longed for freedom and adventure, but she was too afraid to leave the cabin. One day, as she was tending to the garden, she overheard the old woman talking to herself. She crept closer, trying to make out the old woman's words. "The girl is weak and foolish," the old woman was saying. "She is no match for me. I will break her spirit and make her mine." The young woman felt a surge of fear and disgust. She realized that the old woman was not who she seemed. She was an evil shape-shifting beast, using her guise as an old woman to lure unsuspecting victims into her cabin. The young woman knew she had to leave, no matter the cost. She waited until the old woman was asleep, and then she crept out of the cabin and into the forest. She ran as fast as she could, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the old woman's cries of rage and frustration as she fled. But the old woman was not one to be thwarted. She transformed into a giant, monstrous beast and gave chase. The young woman could hear the beast's hot breath on her neck and the sound of its massive paws pounding the ground. As she ran, the memories of her past began to return. She remembered who she was and where she came from. I felt a sense of relief and joy, knowing that I had overcome the darkness and found my way back to myself. But as I ran, I realized that the victory was short-lived. The old woman was not the only beast in the forest. There were others, just as dangerous and cunning. She could hear their cries and snarls in the distance, growing closer and closer. I knew I wouldn't be able to outrun them all. I looked around, desperate for a way to escape. I saw a small cave in the distance and made my way towards it, hoping it would provide shelter and protection. But as I entered the cave, I realized that it was a trap. I was ambushed by the beasts, who had been waiting for me. I fought with all of my might, but I was no match for their numbers and strength. In the end, I was overpowered and dragged back to the cabin, where the old woman awaited me. The old woman cackled with glee, knowing that she had finally broken my spirit. I tried to hold on to hope, to believe that I would find a way out of the cabin and the forest. I spent days dreaming of freedom and escape. But as the years passed, my hope began to fade. I realized that I would never be able to escape the old woman and the forest. I was trapped, forever. I resigned myself to my fate, living out the rest of my days in the cabin, serving the old woman. I lost all sense of who I was and where I came from. I was just a ghost, a shadow of my former self. But even in the darkest of times, there is always a glimmer of hope. One day, the old woman grew careless and let her guard down. I saw my chance and took it. I fled the cabin and ran into the forest, not looking back. I ran and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear the old woman's cries of rage and frustration behind me. But I didn't stop. I pushed myself to the limit, knowing that this was my only chance at freedom. As I ran, I stumbled upon a small village. I saw people going about their lives, and for the first time in years, I felt a spark of hope. I ran towards the village, hoping to find safety and refuge. But as I approached, I realized that the village was not what it seemed. It was a trap, set by the old woman and the other beasts. I could hear the old woman behind me, breathing heavily and whispering in tongues.
Whatever you do, don't look behind you. Run.
I was never able to escape, and eventually I was consumed by the darkness and despair of the forest.